Hello, everyone. I'm Lee. I want to welcome you to Intro to Communication. This week we are going to be talking about verbal communication. Now, you should have a link for a Padlet site that once you click on it, you will get an image like you see here. Now, what's neat about Padlet is under each section, you're able to provide your own comments. So when questions are asked, feel free to chime in, type in your responses, let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, so if you read the chapter, the first thing you'll notice is you read the story about Amanda Todd. And this is her picture. I won't get into the full story, but Amanda Todd was blackmailed, she was bullied, and cyberbullied to the point that she committed suicide. So, why do you think we would start a chapter with something as horrible as that about verbal communication? Well, it boils down verbal communication is what got her to that point. The words we use, how we treat people, how we talk to people do matter. And so we have to be careful with that. And so that's why we're going to dig into this and make sure we're getting the right message across and using the right kind of verbal communication so we don't lead others to this. Okay, so now that everyone is nice and depressed, let's move right into verbal versus nonverbal communication. So we all know what nonverbal communication is, right? You're using your body language, your eyes, your hands. There's all kinds of different forms of nonverbals that we use all the time. But what makes verbal so much better than nonverbal is first and foremost, it makes it so much easier to get your meaning across. It's a lot easier for your meaning to be interpreted by the person that you're communicating with. Now, when we use verbals, we use words as symbols. And it's those symbols that help explain the meaning of the message we're trying to get across. And when you hear a word, there's actually there's three parts, three meanings to that word that you may or may not even think about most of the time. So there's the word itself, there's thoughts about the word, and the referent, which is the actual object which you're referring to. And so I like to think of it like this. If you hear me say the word watch, the first thing everybody thinks of is the word watch. Second, you start thinking about the word and your thoughts on it. And then you have the referent, which could be very different depending on the context. If I just said watch, some of you thought about a watch you wear on your wrist. Some of you thought about a watch that happens when we have bad storms coming through or tornadoes. And some of you thought about watch like you do when you're watching a TV or you're watching somebody. Okay, now I want to get into different meanings for the word. So we just talked about things like a watch and how many things it can represent. That word as a symbol represents so many different things. But how do we understand what that means? Well, you have what is called the denotative meaning, which that refers to the actual dictionary definition of a word. And so when you think of watch, and when you hear watch, you think of a watch somebody wears. You think of the watch like the tornadoes, just like we had talked about just before. So that's the denotative meaning of a word. Again, it's the actual dictionary definition. Now, we also have what is called the connotative meaning of a word. Now, that's when we start getting into slang. So if I say the word watch, and you think about somebody bows up and says, you better watch yourself, you're not going to find that in a dictionary. There's no dictionary definition that explains that when I say you better watch yourself, it means you need to be careful. You're messing up. Something like that. So again, we have the denotative meanings, which is the dictionary, and we have connotative meaning, which is the slang version. It's the words that we use or the interpretations we have for it that we have changed in our language. So another word to think about, another way to think about the difference is the word cool. When you hear the word cool, we all know that it means, according to the dictionary, the temperature, right? But it does have a connotative meaning, just like you see here. He thinks he's cool, he's hip. So I hope that helps clear those up so you understand the difference between denotative and connotative meaning. Okay, so now we're going to the second column of our Padlet, grammar and meaning for effective communication. Now, why does grammar matter when we're talking? We all know it matters if you're writing stuff, just like you see here. Because when you read it, it just doesn't make sense because we know those words have different meanings. So, what does grammar matter when we're talking? Well, grammar is basically our language, it's the structure of our language. And the reason it matters is because when you are talking to someone, and we use a word like watch or cool, the reason they understand exactly what we're talking about in that sentence is because of the syntax meaning that comes along with it. So just like the words have the denotative and connotative meaning, it also has a syntax meaning. That refers to the meaning at the level of the sentence. That's why when we talk, we want to make sure we're using the right grammar so people understand exactly what our meaning is. Because when we're talking, really the most important thing we're trying to do is get our meaning across and to understand the meaning from someone else. So why is the meaning important? And if you think about it, it's kind of like you see here in this picture. We want our messages to come across clear enough so people understand. Not like, again, like this picture where a dog sees something, they're confused, they tilt their head. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But we don't want people to react to us like that. We want to get our message across clearly so they understand what we're talking about and they can then respond and it makes sense. And so what makes those parts of the message make sense? Well, that's the different functions of it. So like you'll see here on our third column, we're getting into the different functions of the message. Now, one of the big things about the message is very seldom will we go into have a conversation with somebody where we don't have some kind of message in our mind plan ahead. Most all of us have sit there and thought out a message. We've had an argument in our mind with somebody. We've discussed stuff, and it looks like this flow chart. We are all over the place. We have an answer for everything they say. We prepared, right? But then how many times did it actually work out like that? Which for me is rare. Because that other person always surprises me because they're going to take things differently than what I meant, or they took it exactly how I meant, and I wasn't having to try to convince them differently. And so now we move into organizing your message. And why does organizing your message matter? I mean, think about that flow chart. We all know people that are like that, and we've done it ourselves where we're going to talk to somebody and we're just all over the place with our thoughts of how this communication is going to go, how we're going to talk to them, what's going to be said, how they're going to respond. And then you get there and start talking and everything changes. Right? It's happened to all of us. Think about this class. When I originally put this class together, it was for us to be in the classroom together. Everybody gets to log on to Padlet. Everybody can put answers. You can put pictures on here to answer the questions. It was going to be fun. Well, things changed. We're no longer in the classrooms. We're having to do this online. So now I'm having to reorganize things and having to revamp it and change it to fit this new setup, which we're going to get into the delivery in a minute. But organizing your message is vital. I have 4 daughters, I've told y'all, and I can be talking to them, and it's funny sometimes they'll just be talking on one subject, and boom, they're off on something else. And I have to tell them, I'm old. You have to step on the clutch to shift gears for me. You got to take me with you, because they will change because there's no organization there. They're just kind of talking. We're making things up. They're not really not making things up, but they're just talking. They're getting stuff out. So they'll go on these little tangents. We all do that. But some people have a hard time keeping up with that. That's why the more organized our message is, the easier it is for other people to follow. And if you think about it, think of somebody from a different culture. You know, if you take somebody from Germany that doesn't speak much English, and you throw them in the deep South where there's a lot of slang words used, or, even big cities, wherever, just pick a place, it's going to be hard for them to communicate. So we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to organize our thoughts and organize our message to get it across so that it does make sense for everybody around. All right, so moving on to our last column, delivering the message. So before we can actually deliver our message, we've created the message in our mind. We went through that flow chart. Here's everything we want. Then we organize it. We got it in the order we want. I'm going to do this. They're going to say this. I'm going to do this. We get it all figured out, right? Well, the next thing we have to do is coordinate how we're going to do this message. Because when it comes to delivering your message, there's many different ways. If you stop and think about it, there's the verbal message of two people talking, three people, whatever. Ever how many folks you're just talking. But what if you're not in the same place? Well, then you start looking at stuff like the telephone. Or like we're having a lot of people are doing today, we're using the internet to communicate verbally. If you have an iPhone, you've got FaceTime, where you can see that person. They may be, several states away, but you can see them and you can talk to them and you can still communicate. It's not exactly the same as if you were right there in person, but it's close because you still get that cooperation from the other people, the other person, whoever it is you're trying to talk to. So you have to decide how you're going to deliver that message so you can get it across as clearly, as easily as possible. All right, and lastly, we're going to talk about, as we deliver the message, what happens when it's not clear. It's not coming across like you meant for it to. Somewhere that message is being misconstrued. Somebody got confused. Something happened. If you've ever been in the Army, especially if you're in basic and you hear somebody talk about Joe, they're not talking about somebody named Joe. That's a name they use for every soldier. Yes, that's where G.I. Joe comes from. So they call everybody Joe. So that can get confusing real quick if somebody says, "Hey, Joe," but your name's not Joe, but they were talking to you anyway. So how do we clear this up? If we're having a message that we have a certain message, we went through our flow chart, we organized it, we know exactly what we're going to say. We've decided how we're going to deliver it. But then they don't understand. So how do we fix that? Well, that's when you get into the real verbal communication part. This is where it takes that coordination and it takes that cooperation from both people to work this out and figure it out to understand exactly what's happening. So I hope all this made sense. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this was originally planned with Padlet to be done in the classroom so everybody could work together on it and answer questions and ask questions and put stuff up to keep the class going. So if there are no questions, I'm going to put my references on here. I thank you for your time and attention, and have a good day. Stay safe.